And now, God, open my mouth so that I can speak. Open our ears so that we can hear, and open our hearts so that we can change by your power and through your grace. Amen. Please be seated. Well, we've come to the end of our journey through the season after the Epiphany. Over the last 8 weeks, we've contemplated what it means to have God become incarnate through the flesh and blood existence of Jesus Christ and walk among us. We've heard the stories of Jesus' miracles, watched him gather a community of followers, and put those in authority on edge with his call to stand with the vulnerable and the oppressed, the lost and the least. Today we're given the story of the Transfiguration, though today is not the feast of the Transfiguration. So why do we get it? I suppose it has more to do with us than it does with Jesus. At this point in Luke's telling, Jesus has made his mission perfectly clear and called us to join him. And still the question for many, even at times those closest to him, lingered. Who is he? Who is he really? For us, with time, distance, and having the benefit of knowing from the other side where the story goes, that may seem hard to believe. But how do we know who someone really is? By what they look like? By what they sound like? Or where they come from? How do we know? Very often we draw conclusions about other people based on something we know about them. Trans, immigrant, Republican, Democrat, Christian. As if any one trait of another person could possibly tell their whole story. I'm not sure this is entirely new, though. It seems like there was a lot of that going on in the first century, too, and it had a direct impact on how people perceived Jesus and received his message. The Jews were waiting for a Messiah and had a very specific idea of what the coming Messiah would be like. Let's think about what they knew about Jesus. The Messiah would not come from Nazareth. The Messiah would not be the son of a poor carpenter. The Messiah would not consort with sinners, and his best friends would not be a ragtag group of nobodies. It was hard for most people to see God at work in and through someone that did not fit the bill of who they were expecting. And Jesus did a lot more miracle working in Luke's gospel than we have heard in these last weeks. But our lectionary hit the fast forward button, so today we've missed a lot. Between what we've been hearing and today, he's cast out demons, he's calmed the seas, he's raised at least 2 people from the dead, and yet still no one really gets it. They're more apt to think of him as a great prophet or healer before the Messiah. Of all the things about the coming Messiah that they weren't sure of, they were sure that the Messiah would be powerful. Now, I think we can make a case that Jesus was indeed powerful, yet it was power as defined by their humanity that they were on the lookout for, and not the power that was born into the heart of Jesus Christ who walked among them. It was not the power of might that Jesus wielded to bring good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and freedom to the oppressed. It was a different kind of power rooted in relationship and justice and love. Over and over and over again, we can see that his motivations are grounded in mercy and compassion and love. Not one step was taken, not one teaching offered, not one miracle executed for his own gain. At no point does he seek his own glory for glory's sake. Now, at this point in the story, those men and women closest to him are starting to catch on. And only days earlier, Peter has proclaimed it all for himself, but they're still caught up in waiting for him to reveal his true self, as if he hasn't been busy being his true self all along. Jesus goes up the mountain to get away and pray. Peter, James, and John go with him. And while he's praying, his appearance becomes dazzlingly bright, and they see that he's been joined and is talking with Moses and Elijah. In this moment, Jesus is visibly linked to two of the most revered figures in all of Jewish culture. As we hold the words we heard from Paul today, we cannot overlook this, or we run the risk of diminishing the faith and tradition of our Jewish siblings rather than seeing our connectedness. Jesus was a Jew, and there is no Christianity without Judaism. This moment not only establishes Jesus' connection to all of what came before it, it establishes Jesus as his own unique figure in the story. He is not John the Baptist, as some confused him to be. He is not a new Moses or Elijah or any of the prophets returned. And Luke is the only gospeler to tell us what they were talking about. Our translation today tells us they were discussing his departure that he will accomplish in Jerusalem. However, going back to the Greek, we see that this verse may be better translated as they were speaking of the exodus he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. His whole journey has served as a new exodus for all of God's beloved people. However, this exodus journey was not about a destination, which makes what happens next all the more important. Peter sees all of this, and immediately his thought is, we need to lock this down. I was joking with the vestry a few days ago, saying that if this happened today, Peter for sure would have pulled out his phone for a selfie and been ready to capture the moment. Now, Peter often gets a bad rap for this suggestion to build 3 dwelling places, but it's not entirely a foolish idea or not grounded in something real. I mean, after all, the temple in Jerusalem was considered to house the dwelling place of God. So it tracks that Peter, having seen this divine moment, would want to try to keep it there. But the voice that comes to them in the cloud, the one that clarifies Jesus' chosen status and commands them to listen to him, makes it clear that the journey is not fulfilled on that mountaintop. This is the only time in the Gospels we're told that God speaks directly to the apostles. God's words echo the words spoken to Jesus at his baptism in the Jordan. When they come down the mountain, they will find themselves on an unavoidable journey to Jerusalem, and God takes action in that moment to make certain there is no confusion as to who Jesus is and what they should do. And that message is as much for us as his disciples today as it was for those on the top of that mountain that day. I think if there's really any folly to be found in Peter's suggestion, It's that they weren't called to stay up on that mountain. It wasn't enough to just follow Jesus up the mountain. They had to follow him back down. The real work was down at the ground level, among the people, and that is where they needed to be. This is the same for us. This church, this wonderful building, is our mountaintop. If we only seek and serve Christ in this place, we're actually not listening to him at all. We gather here to worship, and that has meaning. Yet I find it so compelling that Jesus never once actually called us to worship him. He called us to follow him. Where are we being called to follow Jesus today? Where are we being called to show up outside of these walls as followers of Jesus Christ, to share his message of unconditional love and radical inclusion for all of God's people, no matter who they are? Where is there struggling and suffering in the world outside of this place? And what are we willing to do about it? Most importantly, are we bold enough to follow Jesus even if we don't know where the journey will take us? Theologian Troy Troftgruben writes that the Transfiguration story raises more questions than it answers, and I agree. He says it's more mysterious than explained. The event is profound, yet cryptic, spontaneous, yet connected to other events, transformative, yet changing little about pressing challenges. Like many spiritual mountaintop experiences, it offers a glimpse of the divine that alters perspective more than it alters circumstance. Along with Jesus' disciples, we are called not to understand everything, but to listen to him, and eventually to bear witness to what we've seen and heard. Luke tells us they came down from the mountain that day in silence. Were they stunned, confused, anxious because they understood something coming down that mountain that they didn't understand on the way up, and they weren't sure what it meant and what it was going to demand from them? I think it's likely that all of that is true. I think that's true for many of us today when we encounter the real, living Jesus versus the Jesus we've created that can be contained in books and buildings and who really only exists for our comfort. What I want to say to you all today is it's okay to feel like that. Just like the disciples, you're not alone. We have Jesus to guide us down the mountain, and we have each other to share the journey with. And no matter where Jesus is leading us and what awaits us at the bottom of the mountain, one thing is for sure. Together, we will find our way. Amen.